At the class reunion, he arrived successful and famous, with a beautiful girlfriend on his arm. She said, if you hadn't let go back then, you'd be Mrs. Fu Corporation now. Sitting across from her, he held his girlfriend close, his expression cold. That's all in the past. The others, eager for drama, started teasing them. Under his gaze, I quietly covered the scar on my wrist and forced a smile. Yes, we've been over for a long time. I remember it was Tanya who broke things off, right? While his girlfriend was in the restroom, our classmates started gossiping. Tanya is me. Ethan sat across from me, a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes were ice cold. This was our first encounter in 6 years since the breakup. It all felt so sudden. I only came because our class rep said Ethan wouldn't be here. I never expected to run into him like this. Now, Ethan was the epitome of success, a distinguished young entrepreneur in the city, a returnee with an impressive pedigree. Impeccably dressed in a suit, handsome and striking. The watch on his wrist alone was worth a fortune. Everyone fawned over him, hanging on his every word. In contrast, I was a shadow of my former self. Indeed, she was the one who ended things, Ethan replied calmly, answering everyone's unspoken question. The others let their imaginations run wild. They assumed I was just a gold digger, unable to endure hardship, who had bet on the wrong horse and lost everything. Tanya, I heard the guy you were with after Ethan went to prison, right? And you're still paying off his debts. Is that why you came to the reunion? To ask for money? Amidst the mockery, Ethan's deep, steady gaze remained fixed on me, not saying a word. I laughed awkwardly, offering no response. The door opened and Ethan's girlfriend walked back in. Sensing the strange atmosphere, she asked with a smile, "Did I miss something while I was gone?" Ethan's demeanor shifted instantly. He gently took her hand, his voice warm. "Nothing important, just catching up." She sat down gracefully, her gaze settling on me. A dimpled smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Ethan's mentioned you before. If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be Mrs. Fu Corporation now." Several people's eyes gleamed with schadenfreude. Back in the day, when the Tang family was at its peak, I was the center of attention wherever I went. That jealousy hadn't faded with time. Instead, it became fuel for them to kick me while I was down, years later. Ethan's cool, authoritative voice cut through the awkwardness. "That's all in the past." Everyone fell silent, realizing the boss didn't want to continue this topic. They quickly changed the subject. His girlfriend raised her glass to me. "Thank you for letting him go. You must come to our wedding." I silently covered the scar on my wrist, my voice wooden as I said, "Congratulations. Why didn't you explain things to him?" My best friend, Autumn, was indignant on my behalf over the phone. The reunion had ended early. I stood in the cold wind, wrapped in my coat, exhaling a puff of warm air. "He has a girlfriend now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He has a girlfriend?" Autumn asked, incredulous. Him. Classmates left in 2s and 3s. The streetlights' glow reflected off the snow like shattered crystal. "What a shame. You finally got to see him after trying so hard for so long." Autumn, no one waits forever in the same place for you. Some things, once left unsaid, serve no purpose but to sicken you when spoken later. The cold wind made my eyes sting. I blinked back the burning tears. "I'm giving up." Even though I'd worked so hard for all these years, clawing my way out of the mire, hoping to meet him again in the most dignified way possible, it was too late. "All right, we'll talk more when you get back." The temperature had already dropped below freezing before the spring festival. Taxis were hard to come by. I'd been standing for a while, and my hands were numb with cold. My phone display read, "Waiting in queue." Behind me came the click of high heels, accompanied by a woman's honeyed voice. "Ethan, the snow is so beautiful. It's cold out here. Wait in the car, I'll be there in a minute," Ethan's distinctive voice replied. "Don't be long." As the woman passed by me, she gave me a meaningful look. Then she walked to a nearby car, opening the door. The movement exposed the bracelet dangling from her wrist, painfully eye-catching. It was the Fu family heirloom. Years ago, it had been on my wrist. When we broke up, I had someone return it to Ethan. So she wasn't just his girlfriend, but his fiancée. The crowd had dispersed, leaving just him and me. My taxi still hadn't arrived. Ethan stood silently behind me the whole time. We remained that way in silence, our two shadows intertwined beneath the streetlight. My mind drifted hazily back to that night years ago when we broke up. Ethan had gotten into a car accident on his way to see me. His friend called, his tone hostile. "Ethan's in the hospital. Is his life in danger? So you won't come unless it is. Please take good care of him. Tanya, he got accepted to study abroad. He'll make something of himself sooner or later. Why couldn't you wait a little longer? Are you that desperate for money?" Have you forgotten everything he's done for you? You'd need several lifetimes to repay him. Did it all mean nothing to you? His friend was almost hysterical on the phone, just short of calling me an ungrateful wretch. Suddenly, someone grabbed the phone from him and hung up. You could say I was the one who abandoned him. It's only natural that he hates me. How much do you owe? Ethan's voice pulled me from my reverie, his tone cold. That's none of your business. I inhaled sharply, the cold air stinging my throat, already raw from alcohol. Suddenly, I started coughing violently. The frigid air felt like it was slicing through my windpipe. The pain was excruciating. I bent over, leaning on the lamppost for support. The alcohol I'd drunk earlier began churning in my stomach, making me choke up tears. Ethan stood beside me, watching coldly. A taxi slowly pulled up in front of me. The driver leaned out, going to Wanha Gardens. Yes. I straightened up, supporting myself on my knees, and took a breath before reaching for the car door. Suddenly, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me over. Unexpectedly, I crashed into Ethan's embrace. He demanded, "What are you going there for?" Wanha Gardens was an affluent area, not somewhere people could easily access. I clumsily tried to push Ethan's hand away, but he caught my wrist instead. His scorching body heat seeped through my skin, reaching my heart. I struggled twice but couldn't break free. I looked up at Ethan's dark, inscrutable face. What does Mr. Fu want to say? He pressed his lips together, his black eyes deep and calm, his emotions unreadable. The cold wind howled, tousling my hair. I tugged at the corners of my mouth, voicing his thoughts. You're like everyone else, thinking I'm making money through unsavory means, right? Is 5,000 a month enough? Ethan interrupted me coldly. What do you mean? A layer of mockery finally surfaced in Ethan's eyes. Aren't you short on cash? 5,000, 10,000, name your price. Suddenly, I raised my hand. The sound of the slap echoed through the night. A clear handprint appeared on Ethan's face. In the distance, a woman's startled cry rang out. She flung open the car door and rushed over. Live your own life and keep your hands to yourself, I spat out before getting into the taxi and leaving. You slapped him. Autumn poured me a cup of hot water. Yeah, he wanted to keep me as his mistress. I curled up on the couch, fighting waves of stomach cramps as I slowly sipped the water. After a moment, I suddenly turned and ran to the bathroom to throw up. Autumn patted my back. Your stomach's bad. You shouldn't drink. I took a few deep breaths, wiping away the water left on my lips after rinsing. My throat burned. Was it worth loving him for all these years? I looked up, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my wet eyelashes clumping together, my black hair damp and sticking to my forehead, my face pale. Autumn's complaints drifted in from far away, barely audible. If only you hadn't broken up with him so cruelly, none of this would be happening today. I thought again of Ethan's fiancée. Compared to me, she had an air of brilliance and vivaciousness about her. I vaguely remembered that many years ago, I was like that too. But then I fell so hard, and by the time I crawled out of the gutter, everything had changed. After Autumn finished her work at Wanha Gardens, we walked hand in hand back to our rented apartment. Suddenly, I received a call from Ethan's friend. Tanya, if you're in trouble, I can arrange a job for you. I stayed silent, waiting to hear what else he had to say. They're getting married next month. Jessica Jiang is a nice person, and her family background is good too. I won't bother him again. Don't worry, I assured him. He was quiet for a moment, then tried to explain half-heartedly, we just want Ethan to have a good life. Without exception, all of our old friends had taken Ethan's side. After hanging up, Autumn's eyes were red-rimmed. They don't understand anything. It's okay. Since I still needed to stay here for a while, I found a job not far from home. During the interview, they asked suspiciously, do you have depression? It's in the past. I'm better now. I have a doctor's certificate. Several companies had rejected me during the background check because of this. This company was smaller, and that same evening, I received a notice of employment. I thought the class reunion would be the last time Ethan and I crossed paths. Unexpectedly, 3 days later, Ethan took over our company and became my boss. And my workstation was moved right outside Ethan's office door. I refuse, I said. Fine, Ethan replied coldly without even looking up. Submit your resignation to HR. I laughed bitterly. You're firing me just because I won't change desks. His pen paused and he finally deigned to look up and speak to me. I'm simply giving you a choice. Don't tell me you think I want something from you. I choked, remembering how Autumn had haggled over a bit of rent money just last night. I forced a smile. Mr. Fu is above reproach. Of course I'm not afraid. Ethan nodded slightly. Thank you. Close the door on your way out. Oh, and make sure your chair faces away from me. I don't want to see your face. For the rest of our time there, we had almost no interaction. A week later, the company held a team building event. As the newcomer, I was pressured into drinking too much. "Come on, Tanya. If you don't drink, we'll have to dock your pay," the manager joked. "Don't worry, if you get drunk, we'll take you home. We're all women here, what's there to be afraid of?" Amid the cheers and encouragement, I downed my last glass of the night and collapsed unconscious on the table. The next day, I woke up in a large bed. The bright sunlight made it hard to open my eyes. I sat up, supporting myself. As the blanket slid down, it revealed the soft hotel bathrobe I was wrapped in. I froze for a moment, then got up and walked out. In the spacious living room, Ethan was reading the morning paper with his legs crossed, also wearing a hotel bathrobe. Seeing me come out, he glanced up indifferently. "You're awake. Breakfast is on the table. Eat and then go back to sleep for a while." A chill ran through my entire body. My face turned ashen. "Did we?" Ethan carelessly tossed the newspaper onto the coffee table and slightly opened his collar, revealing suggestive kiss marks. "Unfortunately, you were the one who initiated it last night." I was thunderstruck. My memory of the previous night was completely blank. "That's impossible." Ethan placed a contract in front of me with my handprint on it. The gist of it was that I would be his mistress, and he would pay me 100,000 yuan a month. "This can't be my handprint." "Oh, are you sure?" Ethan chuckled lightly. Faced with his serious and candid gaze, I opened my mouth but couldn't utter a word. Ignoring my discomfort, he pulled out a voice recorder. "Last night, I accidentally recorded your monologue. Miss Tang, would you like to hear your own sordid thoughts?" I shuddered, feeling as if I'd fallen into an icy pit. An overwhelming sense of shame washed over me. These feelings, which I had buried deep inside, were already disgraceful enough. Now that they had been spoken aloud and used as evidence against me, it felt like I had committed a crime. Ethan's eyes were downcast, his emotions unreadable. "Coveting a married man, TSK. Tanya, how about we let everyone hear this recording?" I clenched my fists tightly, my nails digging into my palms. "Are you trying to get revenge on me?" "Yes," he answered casually. "You didn't intend to let me off easy back then. Why should I make things easy for you now? You have two choices. Either fulfill the contract, or I'll make the recording public." The clock in the corner ticked away, accompanied by the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My lips were dry and cracked. I looked up woodenly. "Then make it public." Under his cold gaze, I said numbly, "Ethan, I won't be the other woman." Ethan stared at me intently, then smiled. "Tanya, who do you think you are? Do you really think you have the right to choose?" I found my disheveled clothes in the bathroom. Ethan's clothes, in stark contrast, were neatly hung on the coat rack by the door. The scene before me stung my eyes. I sighed, quietly changed my clothes, and left the hotel. Autumn called, her voice strained. "Tanya, they want 500,000. The sky was gray and overcast, the sun hidden from view. To pay for my treatment, Autumn hadn't saved much money, and my savings were pitiful. They said if we don't pay, they'll expose your situation. They won't tell us where your mom's belongings and ashes are either. I've tried to get an advance on my salary and borrow some. We should have enough by next month." "Okay." After some hesitation, I dialed a number. It took a while for the other end to pick up. "Miss Tang, what can I do for you?" I exhaled and said, "Dr. Jiang, I'm sorry to bother you." Dr. Jiang seemed very busy on his end. After moving to a quieter place, he patiently asked, "Are you in trouble?" I took a deep breath. "Could you lend me 400,000? It was the first time I'd ever asked someone for money. After saying it, I felt like my whole body was on fire. Suddenly, there was a commotion on his end. "Dr. Jiang, emergency surgery." "I'm coming." I hadn't had much hope and was prepared for him to hang up. At the last moment, Dr. Jiang briefly said, "Send me your account number. I'll transfer it today." Then he hung up. The sky was still gray and gloomy. The cold dial tone suddenly felt warmer. In the evening, the manager tapped on my desk. "We're having dinner with clients tonight. You're coming along." Just a few hours earlier, I had asked him for a month's salary in advance. With the borrowed money and my previous savings, I barely scraped together 500,000. When I walked into the private room, I saw Ethan. I watched his tall figure effortlessly mingle with the others. The crystal chandelier's light outlined his handsome profile. The manager gently pushed me forward. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. "Mr. Fu, is she from your company?" Ethan glanced over casually and smiled. "Yes, she's new." "What kind of newbie needs Mr. Fu's personal attention?" "She's quite a looker." Amid the chatter, everyone took their seats. The manager placed me next to Ethan and whispered, "Be sharp tonight. Drink when you need to." The others asked subtly, "Mr. Fu, can your new employee hold her liquor?" Or should we go easy? Before Ethan could answer, the manager quickly replied, "Oh, she can drink, no problem." He pushed a glass towards me. "Let's start with a toast." Ethan smiled silently, lightly tapping the table. I picked up the glass, held my breath, and downed it in one go. The fiery liquid rushed down my throat, igniting a path to my stomach where it churned violently. Everyone cheered, ready to pour more, but Ethan changed the subject. "Now, where were we? Let's continue." The atmosphere was lively, with many toasting Ethan. He excused himself, claiming stomach issues, and didn't drink a drop. In the end, the manager found ways to pour it all into my stomach instead. Finally, unable to take any more, I went to the restroom. I turned on the faucet and started dry heaving. My hair came loose, falling into the sink and quickly becoming soaked. After texting Autumn, I was completely drained. I leaned over the sink, eyes closed, breathing heavily. Unhurried footsteps approached from outside. The door opened. I thought it was a woman coming to use the bathroom. But Ethan's voice came, calm and steady. "Can't handle it anymore." I gathered my strength, stood up shakily, and tried to stumble past him. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back. His large hand cupped the back of my neck. It was scorching hot. "Let go of me." The stomach acid had corroded my throat. Every word was painful. Ethan easily dragged me in front of the mirror, making me face it as he lifted my chin. He smirked. "Take a good look at yourself. Aren't you afraid of attracting the wrong kind of attention looking like this?" In the mirror, my eyes were wet, cheeks flushed, hair disheveled around my ears, and my collar was open. Ethan's deep gaze shamelessly roamed over my body through the mirror. I closed my eyes, my body trembling slightly. "Who could have worse intentions than you?" Ethan chuckled softly, his lips at my ear. "Come home with me tonight, okay? Get lost." He ruthlessly sealed my lips with his, mercilessly stealing the oxygen from my lungs. My blood, under the influence of alcohol, felt like boiling magma raging through my body. The light blurred, and water droplets seemed to be behind a film. Drop by drop, like sulfuric acid on my heart. It was unbearably painful. I broke out in a cold sweat, weakly hitting him. It felt like being dragged back to those dark days. Desperately staring at this dazzling, colorful world, feeling completely out of place. "Ethan, can't you just let me go?" I was falling silently, crashing hard at the bottom of a well. It must have hurt, but I couldn't feel it anymore. "Tanya." Ethan was calling me. No longer with that look of wishing I was dead. He was panicking. So much so that I couldn't tell if the person before me was the young Ethan or the current one. I said, "Ethan, I never want to see you again." This high fever came on fiercely. My mind was hazy, my whole body in excruciating pain, curled up under the covers, shaking uncontrollably. Outside, the north wind howled. In my foggy state, I dreamed of years ago. "Piggyback on Ethan," I asked. "Ethan, what if I die?" He carried me steadily forward, gently coaxing, "Don't say such things. It's just a fever. You'll be fine after the shot." "Hey, do you have enough money? Shots are expensive." "It's fine." "How can it be fine? How many part-time jobs are you working?" Ethan didn't answer. He set me down at the nurse's station, crouched in front of me, and said seriously, "As long as you're safe and sound, nothing else matters." Bundled in my thick down jacket, I fretted, "When Mom and Dad stop fighting, I'll ask them for living expenses to pay you back." Ethan stroked my hair, his eyes gentle. "Trust me, we'll have money in the future." But I didn't stay safe and sound as he had hoped. The night Ethan went to another province for a competition, I came home and opened my parents' bedroom door. Dad was holding another woman in his arms. My seemingly perfect life began to crumble from that moment. What followed were violent arguments between my parents, Dad's disappearance without a word, and the Tang family drowning in debt. One deep night, those middle-aged debt collectors came to our door. The swaying light overhead, the men's excited jeers, the dull pain on my skin, and the nauseating touch, along with Mom's heart-wrenching curses, all mixed into a blur, churning in my mind. The scene fast-forwarded. Mom was forced to her death in the bathtub by the creditors. Autumn found me, barely clothed, and took me to the distant South City. On a rainy day, I curled up in a corner of the hospital, wearing mourning clothes, my expression haggard. "She has hereditary depression. Does she have any other family?" Autumn looked at me worriedly. "She has a boyfriend. He's out of town for a competition. You should notify him to come." The doctor's words mixed with some medical jargon. "She's showing clear suicidal tendencies. Treatment will be very difficult. She'll need constant supervision for several years. The family should be prepared for a long battle." By then, my mental state was too fragile to report to the police and seek justice. Autumn and I were like two stray dogs. We fled, defeated, from the place we'd grown up. On the same day, Ethan's name was at the top of the competition's winners list. He got the opportunity to study abroad. he called. When I answered, I heard the howling wind on the other end. Tanya, Ethan's voice was incredibly gentle. I've kept my promise. In 3 years, I'll marry you. I looked at the slowly closing iron gate, no longer able to find my way home. Ethan, I might not be able to be with you anymore. I held back a sob, tears silently falling. He held his breath. Why? I opened my mouth, hesitating for a moment. His future was so bright. Would it be selfish to trap Ethan in the perpetually rainy South City for the rest of his life? Just outside the window, a girl was crying her heart out behind the bars. The boy's face showed a painful numbness and disgust. I saw love disappearing from his eyes, and it was heartbreaking. The wind blew my hair, revealing the bruises and bite marks below my neck. I wiped my tears and said, Ethan, take care of yourself. Let's end this. I heard the beeping of machines. The sunset filtered through the gaps in the blinds, falling on the sofa nearby, like a beautiful layer of gold dust. I blinked, the nightmare gradually receding. I sat up. A man sat on the sofa, quietly peeling an apple. His pale, slender fingers were deft. Soon, a perfectly peeled apple appeared, round and clean. It was Ethan. Hearing movement, he looked up, meeting my gaze. He silently stood and pressed the call button. The doctor quickly entered, checked my pupils, and after confirming I was okay, turned to Ethan and said, She's undernourished. Focus on adding more protein to her diet. Ethan nodded, thank you. The door closed. He walked to the bedside and handed me the apple. Don't think about anything. Just focus on getting better. I didn't take it. Instead, I got out of bed and started rummaging through the closet. My phone was gone. No outdoor clothes either. He let me fumble around the room. Ethan, what are you trying to do? I stood barefoot on the floor. A beam of sunlight shone in, reflecting my pale, haggard face in the glass. You know exactly what I want. Ethan put the apple on the bedside table, pulled out a tissue, and methodically wiped his hands clean. I want you. He sat in the light, his dark eyes unabashedly fixed on me, his gaze scorching and humiliating. Trembling, I clenched my fists. Ethan, you can't do this to me. Ethan stood up, took a few steps to stand before me, looking down at me as he smoothed my hair. Why can't I? I have someone I like now. Please stop pestering me. Is that so? Ethan's face was utterly devoid of a smile. He cupped my face, leaned down, and stopped when his lips were just an inch from mine. I couldn't break free. As I turned my head, I closed my eyes, my body involuntarily shuddering. Ethan laughed, his cool voice pouring into my ears. Tanya, you're lying. The private hospital was located in the suburbs, with endless forests outside the window. I couldn't leave, nor could I contact anyone. I had tried to ask the doctors and nurses for help, but they said they were powerless. Ethan came every day. Usually in the evening, he'd arrive looking tired from work and talk with me for a while. I strongly resisted any intimate gestures from him, and Ethan didn't force the issue. Lately, I'd been dreaming a lot about the past. Back then, I always had Ethan's name on my lips. I said, Ethan, you're definitely going to be rich and successful in the future. Ethan sighed silently. What flavor of milk do you want today? Banana. As a result, to buy me banana milk, top student Ethan skipped class for the first time and got caught by the teacher. Later, in college, rumors started spreading about him and the campus beauty. I took the subway for over an hour, sitting outside the boys' dormitory crying. Ethan hurriedly got dressed in the middle of the night, rushed downstairs, and gently wiped away my tears. Don't cry. If you want me, I'm yours. And in the future, only yours. That's not how you confess. He froze for a moment, then hugged me tightly. I love you. Back then, we probably couldn't have guessed that more than a decade later, we'd end up like this. Tomorrow, I'm getting married. Outside, the sunset hadn't completely faded, its warmth still lingering. Ethan's voice pulled me back from my distant thoughts. Is there anything you want to say to me? I held the half-empty glass of milk, staring at his face, lost in thought. Suddenly, I understood why I'd been dreaming so much lately. I was saying goodbye to the Tanya and Ethan of the past. The TV was constantly broadcasting news about him and Jessica Jiang, the golden couple, a match made in heaven. That used to be the future we hoped for, but now Tanya was a mess, deep in debt. What right did I have? Congratulations, I said. May you have a son soon. Ethan's apple peeling faltered, the knife nicking his fingertip. Blood quickly welled up. He paused, pulled out a tissue to press on it, and laughed softly. It's okay. Jessica and I are just going through the motions. Do you want children? I don't mind. Ethan, can we just let this go? I suddenly felt very tired. Let's all keep our dignity. Ethan stopped peeling the apple, tossed everything back into the fruit basket, and stared at me intensely, a mocking smile appearing. Just let it go. On what grounds? You started this. In the end, you got bored and walked away without a care. What does that make me? A dog. I closed my eyes, dispelling the sun's afterimage. Then I'll give it all back to you. Ethan froze. What did you say? I looked at the setting sun. If you don't want me to have peace, I can die. Suddenly, my chin was grabbed and turned. I met Ethan's furious eyes. Tanya, are you sick in the head? If you wanted to die so badly, why didn't you just die back then? I don't remember when he left. That night, Ethan's brother Jessica Jiang, who had been my friend for many years, burst through the door. Tanya, what did you promise me? He interrogated me, leaving me bewildered. Do you know how much Ethan will lose by breaking off the engagement? You're an adult now. Can't you stop being as selfish as you were back then, letting Ethan clean up all your messes? Can't you think about him for once? What's going on? What's going on? Jessica laughed bitterly, shouting at me, Ethan's calling off the wedding because of you. And you're asking me what's going on? My ears were ringing, and I sat there in a daze, my mind blank. By publicly breaking off the engagement, where did that leave me? A homewrecker. A third party destroying someone else's family. Jessica roughly dragged me out of bed. You're coming with me. You were so good at this before, weren't you? Bored and found someone new. Just pick any excuse you want. Jessica. Tanya. Jessica trembled with anger. If you hadn't come back, would any of this be happening? His roar echoed in the snowstorm, the north wind howling, freezing all my senses. My ears were buzzing, I couldn't hear anything. His eyes held a hatred I had never seen before. As if someone like me deserved to die. Jessica, it's him who won't let me go. Jessica's face hardened. After we deal with this, I'll send you away. The office building was brightly lit late at night. Jessica dragged me in, but unfortunately, the press conference had already started. Ethan sat calmly under the spotlight. We heard the reason for calling off the wedding is a third party's involvement. Faced with the reporter's question, he remained composed. Miss Jiang and I have some disagreements. We're parting ways amicably. Jessica's face turned ashen, tightly gripping my wrist, not letting me move. But inside sources reveal that you've rekindled your relationship with your first love. Ethan remained unruffled. Those are just rumors. If there are no other questions, today's press conference ends here. Just as he stood up, someone suddenly shouted, She's here. That's her. In an instant, all the cameras turned towards us. I was exposed under the spotlight, disheveled and stunned. Reporters swarmed around, within seconds, surrounding us completely. Questions came one after another. What's your relationship with Ethan Fu? Did you really interfere in someone else's marriage? Camera shutters clicked incessantly. Ethan's smile suddenly froze as he stood up and pushed through the crowd towards me. No, I didn't. I weakly defended myself, but my voice was quickly drowned out by their intense curiosity. The questions kept coming. We have new information. A reporter exclaimed excitedly, holding up a phone. My voice came through tearful and slurred with drunkenness, like sleep-talking. Ethan, I love you. It was a voice recorder. My heart sank. I once thought nothing could make my life worse. When this storm truly hit, I was completely destroyed. Isn't this exactly what a homewrecker would say? Shameless. The whispers of the crowd were like a slap across my face. The color drained from my face instantly. The recording nailed me to the pillar of shame. I'm sorry. Jessica, get her out of here. Ethan pushed through the crowd, panic appearing on his face for the first time. My vision blurred. I only heard that person reading word by word. Father in debt, mother committed suicide, suffering from severe hereditary depression, locked up in South City Mental Hospital for 5 years. Isn't this just a mentally ill person? The revelation caused an uproar. The crowd was in shock. Why would a mentally ill person come out to harm others? She must be sick. Why doesn't she just die? Ethan stopped in his tracks, suddenly looking up at me. Shock, disbelief, incredulity. I sat helplessly amidst the clamoring crowd, my blood cooling bit by bit until my entire body was cold. Tanya. Ethan was calling me, his voice trembling. I knew what was coming next. I was just calmly waiting for the guillotine to fall, completely destroying my life. She was also sexually assaulted. This was the last sentence of the anonymous leak. The moment he heard it, Ethan's face turned as white as paper. Ethan's perspective. Since that day, after returning from the company, Ethan hadn't spoken a word. The Venetian blinds had been closed for 3 days, no light squeezing into the dim room. Missed calls dominated his phone screen. He didn't open a single one. Time seemed to have hit pause on him. Ethan sat there, head down, lifeless. He still remembered the cold tone of the man who took Tanya away. He had said, all of us were hoping she would live. Mr. Fu, you truly live up to your reputation for being ruthless. Without any effort, you've managed to nullify all our efforts. Autumn was blocked outside by security, screaming at him, "Ethan, do you know she'll relapse if she doesn't take her medication? Keeping her locked up, how is that any different from murder? Depression, mental hospital." These words were like countless sharp thorns, tangling wildly in his thoughts, mercilessly pulling at his nerves. Jessica knocked on the door, finally pushing it open a crack, standing in the doorway. "Brother, are you feeling better?" "Why?" Ethan's voice was hoarse, the dull pain in his chest making him feel like dying. Jessica was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, I thought there was no need to check at the time, so. The information was fake, wasn't it?" Ethan's voice was very soft. "Jessica, when you told me she had changed several boyfriends abroad, Tanya was actually locked up in South City Mental Hospital." "I'm sorry, brother. I didn't know." This explanation was weak and powerless. He knew he couldn't blame it all on Jessica. If he had just asked a few more questions, perhaps things wouldn't have turned out this way. Ethan no longer had the energy to listen to Jessica's justifications. Autumn pushed past the secretary's obstruction and entered. The harsh light made Ethan squint, but he didn't stop her. The secretary apologized repeatedly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fu, I couldn't stop her." "Leave us," Ethan said. The secretary carefully closed the door for them, and the room returned to darkness. Autumn just stood there, seemingly not wanting to have any contact with him. "Mr. Fu, there are some things I can say now." The window was cracked open slightly, the cold wind chilling to the bone. Ethan sat there, motionless, just quietly listening. Those who do wrong will always face retribution, sooner or later. "Last year, on Tanya's birthday, I once joked and asked her who she liked most in this world. She said, first was her mom, second was Ethan." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling as if these words chilled him to his very core. At that time, she had just recovered from her illness. She only needed to take one small pill every day to be like a normal person. So this year, to sort out her mother's belongings, I brought her back. Autumn's eyes turned red. "She always said that the breakup years ago was too messy, and this time, she wanted to meet you properly, even if it was just to see her big entrepreneur from afar, it would be enough. Because she knew she wasn't good enough for you anymore." "Ethan, is she not good enough for you? Do you know how the competition spot was secured?" Ethan's hand slowly tightened, as if seeing those truths that could completely crush him. It had already been decided internally, but Tanya wrote a complaint letter demanding fairness and transparency. That's how the spot fell to you. But consequently, she offended many people. Later, after her father ran away, she and her mother were bullied by many people. That invisible hand choked Ethan's throat. He was in so much pain, he could hardly breathe. She had been bullied. Was it because of this? Autumn continued. "At that time, you were participating in the competition in another province and didn't call back for about a week. So you probably don't know that everything turned upside down here. The Tang family fell, her father ran away with his mistress, a bunch of debt collectors blocked their doorway every day, threatening Tanya and her mother's lives. Her mother committed suicide, leaving Tanya behind to be bullied, and then she fell ill. At the worst times, I didn't dare take my eyes off her for even a second. She was tortured beyond recognition then." Autumn stared hard at Ethan. "When you had your car accident, Tanya cried and begged me to let her die. How could she get over that?" Ethan's face was ashen. He closed his eyes. The memories of the past few months tormented him frantically. He had allowed the manager to get Tanya drunk and send her to his room. He had induced her to reveal her true feelings while drunk, and then maliciously forged a fake agreement with no legal effect, just to see her conflicted and pained expression, humiliating and taunting her again and again. Finally, obsessively locking her up in a private hospital in the suburbs. Autumn had come to find him many times, but he refused to see her. He had asked her if she was sick, asked her why she didn't just die back then. Tanya's eyes grew increasingly empty, often staring at him motionlessly. He had mistakenly thought that she still loved him at that time. But thinking about it now, Tanya was silently questioning how he could be so cruel to her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Autumn broke down in tears. "How could I explain? She was sick, even living was a luxury. The only thing she could do was to ensure that the person she cared about wouldn't be dragged down by her. She valued your studies above everything else. That competition was your chance to turn things around, an opportunity she had fought for with her life. She just wanted you to be okay. Ethan, does she deserve to die? Does she deserve to die?" This question hit Ethan's heart like a heavy hammer. The one who pursued her, tormented her, and laughed at her was him. Knowing she was well-mannered, the one who used a contract to insult her was him. The one who deserved to die was also him. We tried many ways to ignite Tanya's will to live. In the end, we found only one thing that worked for her. Ethan suddenly didn't dare to listen anymore. Autumn smiled bitterly and said, "Your name." She always remembered her big entrepreneur. When I left, I joked with Autumn that I'd never return to this place. As it turns out, one shouldn't make such promises lightly. I fell ill again. South City is only dry in winter. Usually, it's freezing rain, but this year, miraculously, it snowed. During their idle chat, the doctors and nurses said, "It's a cold winter this year. TSK, TSK. The Earth's climate is becoming less and less suitable for human survival." New Year's was approaching. The tree branches outside the window were bare, not a leaf left. I pressed my face against the window, my breath fogging up the glass. "There's someone downstairs. He stands there every day. Isn't he cold?" Autumn passed by with a cup of hot milk, her face expressionless. "Oh, really? I guess he's not cold." She hadn't been in a good mood lately. Even Dr. Jiang was the same. I tiptoed around them every day, afraid of setting them off. Autumn paused, realizing she might have scared me, and softened her tone. "Drink your milk. Take your medicine in an hour. Dr. Jiang said he'd take you to build a snowman tonight." I glanced at that person again, feeling a sense of familiarity. Autumn pulled the curtain closed for me. "Stop looking. You'll strain your eyes." "Oh." I returned to bed and, after taking my medicine, leaned against a pillow to play a game. I heard Autumn and Dr. Jiang talking outside. Then, he pushed the door open and walked in. I quickly hid my phone and sat up straight. "I've taken my medicine." The smell of disinfectant immediately filled the room. Dr. Jiang's gaze swept over me, finally settling on my face. "Miss Tang, I won't scold you for playing games." I blushed furiously, slowly taking out my phone. "How did you know I was playing a game?" "I play too." I recognized the background music. Dr. Jiang washed his hands, took off his white coat, and looked at me through the mirror, a slight smile on his face. "Aren't you going to get dressed? I promised to take you to build a snowman." He worked in the thoracic surgery department of the same hospital. The first time I saw him was in autumn. The weather was surprisingly clear, and I was crouching by the fence, picking up a ball of yarn that had suddenly appeared outside. Dr. Jiang passed by and looked down at me. I was panting from exhaustion. "Excuse me, could you help me pick that up?" He glanced at the sign in the yard and said, "According to the rules, you can't touch anything potentially dangerous." Seeing that I didn't move, he asked, "What do you want to do with it?" "Cat's cradle." Dr. Jiang checked the time and crouched down. "I'll play with you, then I'll take the string away when we're done." His lunch break was short. I quietly reached my hands through the fence and played with him for a while. When he was about to leave, I said thank you. Later, we met a few more times. He was busy and didn't pay attention to me. Until one day, he came again, pulling out a string. "Sorry, I've been too busy lately." After that, he started chatting with me. "You don't talk much, do you?" I can't say too much." "Why?" "I'm sick. I probably can't say anything that makes people happy. I can't dump my emotional garbage on others." Dr. Jiang stared at me then, without saying a word. Later, he came more frequently. Sometimes he looked very tired. I tried to learn a few jokes to tell him. Each time, Dr. Jiang would look at me with gentle eyes. He asked, "Tanya, what's your wish?" "I hope everyone can be happy, including myself." I quickly put on my gear and waited for Dr. Jiang to put on his down jacket. He took my hand, and we went downstairs. There was a security door every few steps here. Only he could take me out. Under the night sky, snow was falling heavily. My hat quickly turned white. Dr. Jiang handed me a small shovel. "Take it easy." "Okay." The cold air inexplicably lifted my spirits. I carried the shovel and circled around the frozen fountain. As I turned, I suddenly saw Ethan standing not far away, his eyes bloodshot, his chin covered in stubble, just staring at me. "Ethan." My voice was soft, somewhat surprised. Ethan's lips moved. Jia, I was wrong." In the past, I would have proudly and stubbornly asked, "What were you wrong about?" Now, I just hugged the snow shovel, lowering my head awkwardly. "It's okay. I had been through too much suffering, my edges long since smoothed away." The wind and snow howled in the dark night. Ethan slowly approached, crouching in front of me, his voice hoarse. "How can it be okay? Jia, please say something to me, will you?" I thought for a moment and said seriously, "I wish us good health in the new year." In that instant, the color drained from Ethan's face. Tears streamed down his face as he trembled. "Don't do this to me, please." I touched his face. It was icy cold. So, just like in the old days, I cupped his face and said earnestly, "I wanted to choose a decent way to see you one last time, but it turned into a mess." "I'm sorry, it's my fault," Ethan said. "If I had, it was my choice to leave your life. I can't blame anyone else." I spoke slowly, with a hint of sadness. At the class reunion, I asked the class monitor. I only went because you weren't there. I don't know why he lied to me. I just wanted to hear some news about you to see if you were doing well. Ethan cried uncontrollably. I'm sorry, it was intentional. I see. I smiled, not knowing how to feel. Jia, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me most. Ethan held my hands, finally noticing the scars on my wrists. You don't need to apologize. I don't want to force you to stay. Years later, we might live through hard times together, arguing and bringing up old grudges, counting who owes who. I patiently brushed the snowflakes from his eyelashes. Ethan, I'm really happy to see you successful. But I said I'd earn money for you to spend. Ethan held my hands. Without you, what do I need those things for? I blinked, my nose red from the cold. Look, my scarf costs over 100 yuan. I have enough money to spend. The light in Ethan's eyes was completely extinguished. He asked, trembling, we can't go back, can we? Ethan, you have your life, and I need to walk my own path. I won't be going back to North City. How could hurtful words be easily forgotten? Everyone has memories. I was nailed to the pillar of shame. If I went back, every step I took would be like walking on blades. That would be 10,000 times more painful than letting go of a relationship. Ethan took a soft breath, caught my hand, and just like in the old days, warmed them up again. About the recording, I'm sorry. I tricked you into saying it. That night, I didn't touch you. My eyes grew hot. Ethan then apologized to me. Say you're sorry. He was in agony, greedily etching my face into his memory, making his final farewell. I'm sorry. I gently patted his shoulder, and in the end, I didn't say, it's okay. Ethan, be safe and happy for the rest of your life. The snow was getting heavier. I turned, striding forward with effort, my body swaying in the wind. Behind me, the wind and snow howled, the sound growing distant. I didn't know if it was the sound of the wind or Ethan's crying. Dr. Jiang stood under the dim streetlight in his camel-colored coat, hands in his pockets. I could faintly see his handsome features and focused gaze. I walked closer. He asked as if he hadn't noticed anything, did you see something? I brushed the snow off the brim of my hat, looked up with slightly red eyes and said, Dr. Jiang. Thank you. A few days later, I saw Ethan's face in the entertainment news. He had lost a lot of weight. Facing the interview, he told the media everything he had done, holding nothing back. He admitted to forcing me, and that the recording was his doing too. He also revealed an agreement. It was signed by him and Jessica Jiang. A 2-year engagement ending in an amicable split, a win-win collaboration. They never intended to marry. That night was originally planned in the agreement to hold a press conference announcing the end of their engagement. This incident undoubtedly dealt a devastating blow to Ethan's company, his years of accumulated reputation and status plummeting overnight. Later, Henry Jiang called me. He said, I'm sorry, Tanya. I owe you an explanation. He admitted he had misjudged people. Jessica had ulterior motives and exposed my situation. Those creditors who once blackmailed me for thousands later sold the information to Jessica for double the price when they couldn't reach me after Ethan took me to the private hospital. He also expressed concern about Ethan's work state and asked if I could go back. My answer remained the same. I've said all I needed to say. The rest is beyond my control. 3 months later, my condition stabilized and I was about to be discharged. Warm sunlight draped over me and spring bloomed outside the window. The familiar smell of disinfectant wafted in. I knew Dr. Jiang had arrived. Got any food? I've been busy all day, treat me to a bite. He'd been so busy lately, always foraging for food at my place. I unwrapped my wool scarf, revealing a steaming red bean bun. Dr. Jiang took it without hesitation, tore open the wrapper, and devoured it. I just stared until he asked amusingly, why are you looking at me like that? You're easy to please. After finishing, Dr. Jiang asked, have you considered settling down here? Why do you ask? Well, I have an apartment for rent. I pondered for a moment, are you short on cash? Because he looked genuinely sincere. I don't have much income now, so I might not be able to afford expensive rent. I'm very cheap, Dr. Jiang said seriously, clearly fibbing. No neighbors. I'm scared being alone. I blinked, unsure if he was trying to trick me or not. On the day of my discharge, a spring breeze lifted my spirits. A long absent smile appeared on my face. Crossing the street, I forgot to check the traffic light and was unceremoniously yanked back by Dr. Jiang grabbing my collar. I crashed into his arms unexpectedly. He held onto me, not letting go. I'm pursuing you. His voice was soft, casual, his lips curling slightly as if he'd just commented on the nice weather. Boom boom. A child in the distance shook a toy drum, babbling playfully. Thump thump. It was my heart beating. My voice unsteady, I still bravely looked up at Dr. Jiang. I loved someone for many, many years. I'm not sure. The wind tousled Dr. Jiang's hair, his eyes gentle. Miss Tang, I've also loved someone for many, many years. Give me a chance. At that moment, my eyes grew moist. I'm not good. I've been sick, and my body. Miss Tang, you once said you hope everyone can be happy, including yourself. Dr. Jiang winked. I hope your wish comes true. A gentle breeze blew. Sunlight broke through the treetops, falling on his brow. The spring I once thought unreachable had, unknowingly, blossomed all around, in full bloom. Ethan's perspective. The following winter, Jessica's company declared bankruptcy. Those who had bullied Tanya were also dealt with by Ethan. After several crises, Ethan's company finally revived. That day, Ethan sat alone in his office for a long time. Outside the window, heavy snow fell, car lights below forming a continuous stream. He had been working non-stop for half a month, feeling as if a lifetime had passed. He suddenly remembered that a year ago on this day, it had also snowed. Tanya had appeared at the class reunion. When she saw him arrive with Jessica, her eyes were filled with shock and panic. Later, he dreamed of that scene countless times. He had made changes in his dreams countless times too. He had ended the engagement early, called the police when the manager tried to drug her. He hadn't forced her to drink, nor had he spoken harshly to her. He had, as Tanya had hoped, given her a decent reunion. Tanya had come back, curling up in his arms late at night, telling him about her past ordeals, crying with pent-up grievances. Ethan had held her, kissed her, comforted her, and proposed to her. Later, they had a home. He and Tanya had taken wedding photos. In the photo, she smiled beautifully, her fingers intertwined with his. Every time he woke from these dreams, he lay alone in bed, listening to the ticking of the clock. Only then would he realize that time was moving forward, but Tanya would never appear in the rest of his life. She had left completely. On that snowy night in South City, Tanya had wished him a safe and happy life, her eyes sincere and calm. She said she wouldn't come back. She was sad that they couldn't have a proper reunion. Her eyes were red when she spoke. Because he had hurt her, she decided to leave. There were no words of blame or resentment. That wish for a safe and happy life was like a gentle knife, piercing deep into his heart, bringing in pain that could never be erased. Due to his long-term irregular lifestyle, he developed stomach problems. When it flared up, the pain was excruciating. That night, he woke from his dream again, lying on the cold bed, a crescent moon outside the window. He vaguely remembered watching the moon with Tanya, but that felt like a lifetime ago. He suddenly missed Tanya terribly and booked a flight to South City for the next day. A year later, stepping foot in this place again, the weather was still the same. Strong wind, heavy snow. Pedestrians hurried along the streets. Ethan found an apartment following the address. It was almost dark, but the second-floor apartment hadn't turned on its lights. Ethan waited in a corner. Half an hour later, Tanya's voice drifted over, gentle and serious, that place's tomato beef brisket isn't good. Next time you buy some beef brisket, I'll cook it for you. Autumn likes it too, we'll invite her over. Ethan instinctively looked over, that familiar figure suddenly entering his line of sight. She wore a little white hat, or maybe it was pink or gray. Covered in snow, it all looked white anyway. Her figure had filled out a bit, walking in the snow, no longer swaying unsteadily. Beside her was a tall figure wearing glasses, always looking at her tenderly. He glanced up slightly, his gaze falling on Ethan, and suddenly froze. The two men, separated by wind and snow, said nothing. Hey, Dr. Jiang, did you hear what I said? It was her familiar tone, but directed at someone else. Dr. Jiang looked back. I heard. You want to make tomato beef brisket, but last time you burned the pot. I haven't bought a new one yet. Tanya hung her head dejectedly. Oh, sorry. Dr. Jiang patted the hat on her head, like patting an adorable polar bear. You go home first, the kid hasn't been fed yet. Where are you going? To buy a pot. What about the beef brisket? I'll buy that too. Why so urgent? We're eating it tonight. Tanya trotted off into the building. Only then did Dr. Jiang look over. Ethan had nothing to say, so he just said, congratulations. Dr. Jiang smiled. Thank you. Actually, he knew Ethan had misunderstood. The kid was the cat he and Tanya were raising. But Dr. Jiang didn't want to explain. Last year when he brought Tanya down to build a snowman, he had given Ethan a chance. Regardless, Tanya and Ethan were over. They should each find their own happiness. Her condition. Stable, Dr. Jiang said directly. She has a good temperament, doesn't get angry easily. She's a wonderful girl. Ethan knew she was doing well, because he knew what Tanya looked like when she was happy. Dr. Jiang's gaze through his glasses was sharp and scrutinizing. Mr. Fu, how long have you known her? 14 years exactly. You know her better than I do. Her birthday is coming up, I want to get her a gift. Snacks, puffed snacks are best. She doesn't like chocolate. Ethan blurted out without thinking. Dr. Jiang nodded formally. Thank you. 14 years exactly. You know her better than I do. These words were Dr. Jiang's expression of dissatisfaction towards him. If he knew her so well, why did he hate Tanya so much? Why did he let her suffer so much in the days that followed? Ethan, a clear voice cut through the wind and snow. Ethan turned his head abruptly, looking over. That face he had been thinking about day and night suddenly entered his vision unexpectedly. Even the curve of her smile was exactly the same as in his memory. Tanya stood holding an umbrella, another in her arms, her eyes wide with shock. Why are you here? Ethan's heart ached, seeing the clarity and calmness in her eyes. She had let go. He was silent for a moment, then said, business talk. Just passing by. Met Dr. Jiang and chatted a bit. Passing by the neighborhood. Tanya was a bit confused. Dr. Jiang asked, why did you come down again? Tanya remembered something and handed him the umbrella. I saw it was snowing heavily. I was worried you'd catch a cold, so I came down to bring you an umbrella. When she spoke to Dr. Jiang, the corners of her mouth turned up slightly, her eyes warm. This scene pained Ethan's eyes. Would you like to come in for a bit? Dr. Jiang asked politely. Ethan smiled. No, I have a flight to catch tonight. Tanya wrapped her coat tighter, suddenly remembering something. Wait for me. She turned and ran into the building. Dr. Jiang, expressionless, followed her up. Ethan waited downstairs as the snow got heavier. The gray sky pressed down, making one's heart feel stifled. His stomach started to hurt again. Henry Jiang called, brother. He hesitated. Your test results are back. It's stomach cancer. Ethan stood motionless, not sure if he heard or not. He looked up at the vast snow and mumbled, I see. Then he hung up. He continued to wait as if nothing had happened, his eyes fixed on the building entrance. A warm beam of light emerged from inside, falling on the snow, forming a trapezoid. After a while, Tanya came down alone. Dr. Jiang had wrapped her up like an immobile cotton ball. She clutched a small red box, walking over with difficulty, and handed it to Ethan. I baked these cookies myself. Take them for the road. Ethan took it, suddenly remembering how Tanya loved baking many years ago. Back then, they were barely edible, with a strong eggy smell. All the failed attempts had ended up in his stomach. She really had no talent for cooking. Ethan had even said she was banned from the kitchen in their future home. In the blink of an eye, she could now bake quite well. Tanya said very sincerely, thank you for donating to us. Ethan knew their organization was helping people with mental illnesses who were struggling financially. So he donated every month, keeping only a small part for himself as living expenses. Ethan said, you're welcome. Then he stared at her face, it's cold. You should go back. I probably won't come again. Tanya smiled, how can that be? You'll have to come for future award ceremonies. Ethan's throat tightened and he said nothing. She turned, her snow boots crunching on the snow. Just before entering the building, she turned back and called out, Ethan. Ethan immediately looked up, his heart suddenly coming alive. He waited for her to say something. Tanya just smiled at him and said, Happy New Year. A simple New Year's greeting. No wishes for health or happiness anymore. Ethan's heart returned to silence. Standing in the cold wind, he replied, Happy New Year.